All right. This is the last talk of the day. We're ending on a bang. Title of the talk is My Process for Building a Custom WordPress Theme in 2025, presented by Beth Soderberg. In this talk, Beth will review her current FSC process for building a custom theme. Everyone give a warm welcome to Beth Soderberg.
Thank you. All right, so this thing moves, and I'm a little shorter than Caleb, so okay. All right, so my name is Beth Soderberg. I am the CEO and lead developer at Bethink Studio. This talk is accumulation of all of the learnings I have had building themes over the last 15 years. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning because you can't figure out where you are now without figuring out where you've been. So we're gonna walk through theme process and how people have gotten to where they are. We're gonna talk about current workflows. We're going to see some old friends, and we're going to have some resources for you all. There is no one way to do this. Everybody I have talked to who is building FSA themes is doing it slightly differently. It is still very new and very much something that people are still experimenting with. That said, it has gotten stable enough to actually use, which is my favorite thing in the world. So, okay. Those of you who have met me before know that I love the bleeding edge of technology. So we're going to start with a brief history of WordPress theming, mostly because you can see the direct lines to the logic and how you work with a full site editing theme from the themes that we have built in the past. And I go through this mostly to help those of you who are more familiar with building a theme in, say, 2015, than building this type of theme in 2025 to start to see the connections, because you actually know more than you think you know. Trust me. So this theme, does this look familiar to anybody? This was the original default, even before Kubrick. And it is special looking, but it has all of the components here that you can see eventually become the core parts of our theme structure. So you're starting with the most basic possible theme you can have. Your functions file, your index file, some CSS, and a few other random things. Homage to the blogging roots being the presence of the comments.php file from the very beginning. Okay, so that's where we start. It's a far cry from where we are, but here we go. Then the Kubrick theme's name is actually default. I didn't know this until I tried to find it in the theme repository, and guess what? It's still there under default. And I had to install it and fix some bugs to get it to even render, but I needed a screenshot for you all. So here we go, just in case anyone forgets. When you look at the theme structure here, you can see that we've started to build out some of what will become the content management features of WordPress. We're not quite to templating yet. We're not quite to anything other than a blog, but we're adding conceptually more stuff that will later form the core of extensibility and theming and creating different templates. Okay, so this was the default theme for about 5 years until we hit WordPress 3.0. But before that, we had Genesis, because people were like, I can't work with this. I need something that has more structure so I can extend this to do what I need it to do beyond blogging. And for a lot of folks who started building websites around this time, Genesis was where they started, because it was the best way at the time to get an extensible solution where you could actually build something more meaty than a blog. Then we have 2010, which came out with WordPress 3.0, which was a reminder, the debut release of WordPress as a content management system, creating the ability to have custom post types, the ability to have the taxonomy structures as we know them today. They were there before, but then they became extensible. You could customize all of that. It was a game changer for WordPress. And the 2010 theme looks like this. We've all seen it. It's been around. This is the first theme in this deck that is still available and maintained. So, and you can see that we have started adding templates and the things that will eventually become in much more sanely managed folders. Because originally, most of our themes looked like this. There are long lists of files that should have been partials. But we have the fundamental structure for what themes are going to look like for the next 10 years out of this. Then other people who were unhappy thought, I need a better way to work with these custom fields. Because custom fields were built into WordPress core, it was very difficult to use them as natively constructed. So people started building advanced custom fields into the custom themes they were building with the new templating frameworks. Then, I didn't know this until I was researching this. WP Bakery was actually the first page builder. And it was the first one that actually had what we now call full site editing. And it was published through Envato, which was hugely popular at the time as an alternate place to sell WordPress and other digital things. So then we had Underscores, which was released early in 2012 and became the basis structurally for the default WordPress themes that came after it. So from 2012 through, I believe, 2019 are all based on Underscores. And then here we have 2012. And you can see there's also an image here. I don't know why my unit test data didn't populate it, but here we are. And again, you're seeing even more content structures. This was around the time that post format experimentation was happening. So you see some of that. I know someone in this room loves post formats. Yeah. And you can start to see how we are building out more options. But then the options get unwieldy because you don't actually need all of these things for every site, right? Okay, Divi was released in 2013 because the pressure to figure out how to do this easier was there, and people were innovating. Divi was originally a theme, not a page builder. So it became one, but it was originally released as a theme. Beaver Builder was released in 2014. Elementor was in 2016, which I thought must have been much earlier, but apparently calendar says I'm wrong. I mentioned 2017 because this was the last major default theme before Gutenberg. So it's sort of your full-fledged theme based on this original templating framework. And what happened with it is that what people were doing, the best practice at the time for a truly custom theme, was either creating an underscores-based theme, so using the same base that these core WordPress themes were using to build your own base structure, or taking one of these themes or another theme and using a child theme of it. And from there, people were adding custom post types, custom taxonomies, and we're relying heavily on advanced custom fields. And advanced custom fields became a tool that people often were using, and I'm sure many of you have seen these sites, where you would have a repeater with flexible content. And you would have a field for the header, and you'd have a field for the content, and you'd have a field for an image, and you could reorder them. It was rigid. It wasn't easy to see what you should do as a content editor, but it was the beginning of the idea of how do we make the WordPress parts move around using WordPress core itself, not one of these page builders. Okay, so this is what 2017 looks like. And then this is thank goodness we finally have a template parts folder version of this content structure. Okay, so 2019, this is our first, we skipped 2018 because focus was on Gutenberg development. 2019 was the first Gutenberg compatible default theme. And it really wasn't trying to do much visually because you really couldn't. But you can see that the theme structure here mimics the old while bringing in some new stuff. So we start to have the style editor, CSS files, our JSON file is there, but we still have all of our old stuff too. So this is where we enter the era of the hybrid Gutenberg theme, a special place that I am glad is ending. Then this theme was really hard to work with. I have to admit, I built a few sites using it as a parent theme. It was released by Automatic as an experiment, and it was the base code structure for the, whichever one this is, the 2021 theme, I think. I should have labeled this better, sorry. And so it kept some of that hybrid stuff and experimented with different ways of doing the math of a theme. So like your variables were using CSS variables, and there was some really weird stuff with layout that I personally didn't like, but that was that. And then we go through, and then this is the 2022 theme. And suddenly, all of our old stuff is gone. And everyone goes, oh my goodness, I don't want a new career, but I have to learn everything all again. At least that's what my internal dialogue said. I don't think I'm the only one. So from here, there was, I think, a problem with getting active documentation out in the wild and active examples as this was being developed. There just weren't that many people that were using it. WordCamps and similar in-person events were still coming back from the pandemic. And I know I felt very isolated. As somebody who's always been pretty active in the community, I was like, I don't even know who to ask about this. So from here, I went to WordCamp US when it was in San Diego. And there was a workshop there that was not recorded and should have been on how to do this. It was amazing. It was 3 or 4 hours long. There were only maybe 20 people in the room. It was so good. But that helped me a lot. And then here we've got 2023. Okay. So going from that historical framework, thinking about what are we trying to do when we're building a theme? Almost always, I'm building a theme for a client. Occasionally, I build something for myself. Rarely. So what are we trying to do? Portability. This is the main critique you have of site builders. Because when I say portability, I mean I want you to be able to write your heart out and have thousands of blog posts and someday decide that you have whole new branding and you need a new theme, and to just move your content from one site theme to another and not have to worry about it all getting messed up. And so data portability is at the core of keeping everything clean and tidy, which is going to be a theme of this talk. Extensibility. You want to be able to add all the fun stuff on it. When the client asks in 3 years, hey, can we build a mini site just in this part of the site so that our voter guide can look completely different than everything else? You want to be able to say, of course you can. But the goal with any architecture is to not lock yourself in, right? So you want to plan for all the possibilities, but the truth is you don't know what the possibilities are going to be. Accessibility. Baking accessibility best practices in from the jump is the best way to end up with an accessible website at the end. I'm also a big advocate for getting your sites audited and doing remediation rounds and all of that. But if you start with a known accessible base and you keep your color contrast in mind, there are tools to test this. Then the issues that you'll get to at the end when you are being audited are going to be smaller, but they will always be there. I've had my work audited many times, and Joe Dolson, who's a very active person on the accessibility part of the WordPress project, has audited my work, and every once in a while I'm like, Joe, every time you do this, the list gets longer. And he goes, but you get better and I get to get more detailed. Double-edged sword. Okay, you want it to be responsive. These earlier themes were not responsive. The internet of the early 2010-ish was not intended to be mobile responsive. I think we've moved a little bit past mobile first to just being more mobile inclusive. But the idea that starting with a framework that actually does work on multiple screen sizes without having to do anything extra saves a lot of time. Maintainability. This is my advertisement to not use too many plugins. If it is something you know how to write in a function by yourself and you know that you're doing it the correct way, it should go in a custom plugin. If you're adding a big plugin like Jetpack just because you want a Google Translate widget, pick something else. You want to keep the total number of things on your website as small and efficient as possible. Durability. Ideally, your website lasts for a long time. Philosophically, I'm against the idea that a client should plan to rebuild everything completely every 3 to 5 years, mostly because at this point, they don't have to. If your data is structured well, you should be able to change your theme or change your content architecture within the construct of the technical basis you already have. Long term, this saves them money, but it also helps you maintain a relationship with them so that if they need a new feature or, oh, there's this new thing in core, now we can do this that we couldn't do when we built this 5 years ago. That brings you more work, but it's more interesting than rebuilding the same thing over and over. Speed. Everyone wants to be the first pig. And again, the leaner something is, the faster it will be. This is why I mentioned Jetpack as an example of something that I've seen people use for like an infinitesimal amount of what it does. If you're actually using it for everything, fine. But make choices that are going to minimize the total bulk of the site. And overall, this is my take. You're going for elegance. You want someone else to be able to look at this. If you get hit by a bus and all of your sites get inherited by your old WordPress friend, and they look at your stuff and they're like, oh my God, Beth, what were you thinking? That's not good. You want inline documentation. You want to follow best practices. You do not want to invent the wheel. You definitely don't want to code a whole theme from scratch. I've inherited those. It's not good. It's terrible. Okay, so looking at my goals over time as a theme developer, I am completely self-taught. I had an editorial job at a magazine and an administrative job at the corresponding nonprofit. And in the 2008 recession, the IT director said, "Hey, you, I'm not allowed to hire anybody. I'll teach you everything I know." So by 2010, I was trying to figure out how to build a site. That was my first goal. And then by 2012, I was like, I like this. I kind of want to do this instead of this communications work. It's less stressful to deal with computers than people, though I still deal with both. Then in 2014, I started figuring out my own base theme. And really, the purpose there was a default to work from. By this point, I was working at an agency. And then I kept iterating on that. So by 2019, I kept my base theme, but I iterated it to be Gutenberg compatible. Part of the advantage of doing it this way was that I could update themes that I had built as far back as 2014 without changing the core. Then I started to experiment a little bit more in figuring out a true Gutenberg first method and abandoned my underscores based theme. Now I have come to a place where I am using 2 or 3 themes as my base and using create block theme to make the actual full site editing theme. So I ask you this question: is the goal to write as much custom code as possible? No. Many people have egos that say yes. Or they try to compensate for not knowing something by writing more code. But the answer is no, and I'm glad that you knew that. So I outlined a little bit of this. I started with Genesis themes, and then I moved to 2012 child themes. Then I was using my underscores-based theme, and I was experimenting with hybrid themes. And the reason I struggle with hybrid themes is that they were never meant to be sustainable. There had to be a bridge from the old way to the new way, and this was it. And so you would build something you needed was missing, you couldn't do that the new way, but you could do this the new way. And it was just a, like an awkward growth phase where your legs are too long, but your arms are too short. Then once 2022 came out, that particular default theme, there started to be more of a better workflow to actually build full site editing child themes. And that was because of the create block theme plugin. So I've been doing that for a few years, and now I'm using a few different parent themes, but create block theme is your friend. And it's your friend mostly because you could do all of this yourself. You could read the documentation, you could write JSON forever, but the thing that's shifted with full site editing and traditional theming is that some of your theme structure is now in code that is modifiable in the database until you take it out of it. And what this does is take all of those modifications you've made and pull it out for you so that you don't have to sit there and think through how to structure your syntax for all the colors. So once you install it, you can get to it under Appearance, Create Block Theme. If you don't have a theme that is Gutenberg compatible installed, this won't show up. And then to get to the full site editor, it's under Appearance, Editor. And this screenshot is showing Blockbase, which is a theme that I mostly like, but has horizontal padding issues on the home page for anybody who is interested. Okay, so Then we're actually building a theme. What do? You want to set your defaults through the site editor. And this is the part where it feels wrong because you think you should be writing in some text file somewhere. But instead, you need to take your design file and do some math and figure out what is the multiplicative factor that should be the spacing between all my blocks. I usually make the vertical block spacing the same as my spacing between paragraphs, because then everything else can be relative to that. I also change everything to rems, because sanity. And then this is your content width. This is your main body. But this wide width, when you see you want to make the block a wide width, this is that. You can also set this up in your JSON file, but again, why? And then in here, Blockbase installs a million default fonts. I disable them every time because I can't handle looking at them. But they're there. There's a workflow to get Google Fonts in here through the admin. If you're using something from Adobe or somewhere else, an independent type foundry, you're going to have to follow their documentation. But then you can set defaults for your text, your links, your headings, your captions, and your buttons. And you can also set those font size presets. So on the side of the editor where you've got small, medium, large, whatever, you can set these. What I try to do is get these to match my headers so that internally you have typographic consistency no matter what someone picks, because no one is going to pick something based on whether it's an H2 or an H3, and you want to try to teach people to actually use proper syntax. I don't know. Seems ideal. Okay, then you get to go through your color palette. You've got, again, the different options for standard things. You can set custom gradients. This is one of those things that, like, you got to get your naming conventions right. Different clients, different projects will need different names. So in a lot of the base themes, you'll see primary, secondary, tertiary. I have clients where it's like they've got 15 different kinds of blue. And sometimes you just have to go blue 1, blue 2, blue 3, because otherwise you can't get them all in there, right? So make a judgment call, but make it make sense and make it so that it is logical to whomever is actually looking at it. You want your content people to be able to hover over it, see the name of the color, and be able to look at their documentation and know which one it is. I have never used the background, but you can. Same with shadows. Individual blocks. You should go in, and particularly when you're working off of a design, you should go in and make your defaults for all blocks match the design. You can disable blocks. You probably shouldn't. All I've ever seen that do is confuse end users. Also, avoid adding plugins that add like a majillion blocks because you only need one. You're going to end up with like Frankenstein content because someone who is not sure what they're doing is going to just pick what they see. And maybe what they see isn't what you've styled. So you need to go into each one of these and make sure, most of them are fine by default, but the button in particular, every single site, I go into the button and fix it. Then you need to determine your content structure. You've got defaults. These are the ones that come with WordPress core. Posts, pages, categories, tags. You need to think about custom post types, custom taxonomies, and custom fields. What things actually make sense? I'm a big advocate of this. I still don't think WordPress natively does it super well, but Drupal does. So watch a talk about custom structures in Drupal and port the same ideas to WordPress, and magically, your content editor will be much better equipped to find the content that they're trying to edit and put the new content in the right place. All right, anything that you're doing like that should be in code, and it should be in a custom must-use plugin so that people can't disable their content types. Then you should set up your content patterns. So this is where, if you're working from a design, you should look at it and be like, okay, we have rows that happen over and over with this same set of blocks. And from there, you can set them up a few different ways. So the first way is an unsynced pattern. So this is, I want this to be the default. Someone can pick it and put it on a page, but then they can change whatever they want, including things like padding, spacing, all that. Then we have synced patterns. This is, I want these to be the same everywhere. These are good for things like advertisements, like someone has a blog, and on every post about a certain thing, they have an advertisement for an action that someone can do related to that thing. And every time they update that, if you're using this synced pattern, it will update it throughout the site. And then my new favorite, partially synced patterns. So this is where you create a pattern, you have to tell it it's synced, but after you save it, you can enable overrides, but only on some blocks. You can do it with headlines, you can do it with images, you can do it with text. You cannot do it with like a video embed. So sometimes I've made partially synced blocks where I have like the left column is partially synced and the right column just has a video. But the key here is that you can keep your padding, your background colors, all of that styling out of the hands of your content editor, thus promoting unity and happiness throughout your site. Only once all these structures are in place should you be migrating your content. Because if you haven't done these things, there's no place for it to go. Similarly, while you're migrating the content is actually the best time to set up your template variations because you have to do it anyway, and you may as well do it while you know what content you have and need to do something with. When you're adding a template, again, you're still in the editor. And you look at this and you're like, oh no, what do I choose? Hello, old friend, this is the same. It's exactly the same structure. The labels are the same. It's all the same. Then you set up the header and footer. And you're like, well, Beth, what if I want a different header on my homepage than on every other page of the site? Well, guess what? You can make as many as you want, just like you could make as many header.php files as you wanted and pull them in as includes to your other templates. So there are default theme headers that come with block-based, which is what you see in the background. But you add it, and then here you go. And suddenly you're like, oh, cool, I have all this stuff that I stole from the default, and I don't want a lot of it, but it's here. I can remove it. I can use this lovely map list view of everything that's on here to tell me what I have and move it all around. And then I can deal with navigation, which is the most confusing and horrible part of full site editing. So you add a navigation block and you're like, but that's not the menu I want. Why? It's because it's storing multiple menus, and sometimes the interface to pick which one you want is not obvious. So you've got the red arrow, you've got standard alignment, you've got what kind of hamburger do I want, why the default is 2, I have no idea. And down here at the very bottom, the purple, is manage menus. And then you get to a nice, sane list of all your menus. And I like editing them here because I can find them. Maybe that'll change someday. But then, once you're done with all of that, then you go and you create the block theme. So you go, you press the export. I'm usually creating a child. You export it, and voila, you have your theme. Look at it, remove unwanted defaults, take out all the extra gradients. Please. Add anything additional. There's all sorts of configurations that you can modify in your theme.json. I've got links to documentation at the end, but look through. There's going to be things that you want to add consistently. Set up custom block styles. I don't think these are as necessary as they once were because of patterns. However, block styles can be useful. You should disable anything you're not using, and you should add things that make it easier for your end user. This screenshot is the one thing I add to almost every site. I add a block style for the heading block that allows people to pick the style of the other headers, because people will always tell you, well, I want it to look like an H3. And I don't really care what an H3 looks like. I just want them to be able to pick the right one. And then what I do is I sync the code for this up with the same code that I showed you earlier that's generated for your small, medium, etc., so that you have consistency throughout. Then you actually want to be able to write some code, so you can add some tooling. This is a screenshot of our default workflow, and we've got Composer and Node that we're using to manage our packages and compile all of our CSS so that it goes both to the back-end editor view and the front-end site without you writing it twice. Also, the customizer, if you write CSS in the customizer, you're going to end up with CSS in your database, and it does not apply to the back-end editing experience. If you go to the additional CSS view in the full site editor, it does apply to the back-end view of things. So if you have to do something hacky real quick, just heads up. And then write any of your CSS and JavaScript and whatever, and this is the same as theme building always was, okay? You just have to do a lot less of it. Then you want to build any custom blocks for custom functionality, because part of what you should be doing is considering the proper and most efficient way for a content editor to deal with the content in question. It's not going to be the same for every site. This is an example of a little plugin that we made that extends functionality in Restrict Content Pro to add a little bit more Gutenberg functionality to it. And what we have decided to do, this is the first one, but as we build these little plugins for clients, we're going to open source them. So this is our debut. Then use the block bindings API to output your custom fields where it is appropriate in your templates. This is the biggest thing that I have seen as a barrier for people. Some of that is because the custom binding API wasn't useful until about a year ago, which was annoying. So there's all sorts of hacky ways to do this. There is now actually a proper way to pull your custom fields into your theme template in a full site editing theme. Integrate any additional custom functionality. Standard blocks do a lot, but they don't do everything. You do not want to use, say, a taxonomy instead of a filter that actually filters when you have a complex filter need. And then you should test your work. Duh. This is just a sample of a theme that I worked on recently of what the theme ends up looking like with following this process when you're done. And so you still have a templates folder. It's just your HTML files for your full site editing theme. Same with the patterns and the parts. At the top, the assets folder includes images and some other stuff. The facets folder is because this particular theme was using Facet WP. So there's some more traditional templating in there to deal with that. and then everything just compiles nicely, and you've got it all nice and clean and tidy so that when someone else looks at it later, they're like, oh, I know where to go to fix this. So this is the very last thing. I know I'm running out of time, but humor me. You have to put all your things somewhere. If you build something really good, but you don't have bookshelves in your house and you put your things everywhere, then you end up in a situation where you can't find your things. And that's bad. So we have our database, our files, and our code. The database of record, once a website is launched, should be the production site. Unless there is a major security vulnerability or some other really good reason, you shouldn't touch it. It should be pulled from, not pushed to. Files are things that you should also not touch. You shouldn't be hacking core. You shouldn't be hacking plugins. The code that you should be touching is the code that you have written. Your theme, your custom plugins. That's it. You need a few environments. You should be working locally, pushing up to a development site that is a place to experiment and really sandbox everything. When something's ready to go, you deploy it to staging for testing, and then you deploy it to production. Staging shouldn't be a sandbox for people to play around. Keys to theming sanity. Git. It's great even when you're working by yourself. It's even better when you're working with a team. You need a web host. I have no comment on that. You need a local environment. I use local. And you really need to keep your code only in the theme. I mentioned the difference between the advanced CSS editor and the customizer CSS. If you're in a pinch and you gotta fix something and you need to cowboy code just a little bit, fine. But move it into your theme later. Keep everything where it's supposed to be long term. This is really small, but I tweeted out a link to my slides, but on Blue Sky earlier. So you can see this, but this is our internal documentation for how we deploy. And we basically have GitHub Actions set up to auto-deploy our code for us so that we're not SFTPing files, so that when we do accidentally override each other, we see that we have a merge conflict, all of that fun stuff. And then I have the correlate refresh workflow. So again, keeping your database of record clean unless of case of emergency, and how all of those parts should be moving around. And all of the pink text is just like the most boring stuff in the world, but it's useful for documentation to be that way sometimes. All right, so that is it. The moral of the story here is pay attention to what you're doing, how your team works. Again, there's no one right process. People are still innovating in this space. So pay attention to what's working for you, especially with things that are known to be the trickiest parts, like navigation, or I made a new change through the full site editor. What is our process for getting that into our theme, right? So pay attention. Don't forget to actually also have workflows for custom functionality. I mentioned Facet WP earlier. My team has a standard way of working with Facet WP. Is it the same as this? No, because it's not block-based. But you need workflows for each piece if you're going to standardize across a team. Keep documentation inline and also internally. There's inline documentation in our themes, but we also have an internal wiki where we write everything down. And pro tip for documentation, as someone who is on Slack all day, every day, and has random ideas at random times, you can search by emoji in Slack. So if someone has a good idea for documentation, it should get a light bulb reaction. And then if you search for the light bulb, you can find them all. You can also now take anything that is reacted to with a particular emoji and create a to-do list out of it. My favorite thing. That just happened like a month ago, life-changing. Write code only when you need to. It's not about you and your ego. If you don't know the answer, Google it, and if you still don't know, ask a friend. Open source what you can. I think this is becoming more important as the environment we are working in is changing. And that is all I'm going to say about it. Overall, keep it simple. Don't over-engineer. Elegance is hard. It is hard to make something that is balanced and clean and simple. But the things that end up creating problems later are always the things where you were like, I don't know how to do this. I guess I'll do the weird thing. So keep that in mind. And with that, I want to say thank you. And if you do want, these are my favorite resources as somebody who has been building themes for a long time, but also continues to learn all the time. These are my favorite full site editing things to read and consume. The full site editing, I didn't know what to call it. It's a website by Carolina Nymark. I might have said that wrong, I'm sorry. She has worked on many of the default themes and is absolutely brilliant. So this whole website is basically her documentation. And then you've got your WordPress.org stuff and whatever. But then there's also a really great book. I am very partial to books. I know I work on computers all day, but you can get this as an ebook. I ordered the print version because I'm old school. But it's very, very good. And Tammy has also done a lot of work on all of the default themes. Not all of them, most of them, a lot of them. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. If you want my slides and you're not on Blue Sky, you can ask me for them, and I'll send you a link. I just can't handle the alternatives anymore. Personal, yeah. So block bindings isn't going to work because you always have to do a custom API call to get them. But the reason I've been going back to child themes after so many years of using a base theme is because of the inherited benefits. So if there's a new block, that has slowed down, thank goodness. But if there is a new block, you're going to get at least default styling, not just from core, but also from the theme if you're using a child theme. You will get default styling from core, but it might not be remotely related to your actual theme. So that's part of why I've been child theming a lot. It felt at first like a step back, and then I had to get over myself and realize that that was the responsible way forward. Yes. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question is about working with an existing theme and deregistering a block style programmatically, right? A style variation. Well, that code sample is not in here. but I can add it later. You basically, again, part of child theming is actively taking away the things that you don't want from the parent. You should be doing that. So the style of variations, it's also true with the block styles themselves, which was the first thing I said. Montclair really wants me to connect to their internet. But the documentation for how to do all of that is in those resources at the end. And you don't think it is? She may not. There's also, so I'm a cobbler with no shoes. I worked as a freelancer for many years. I worked with a team for many years under my name before we named ourselves. And we are going to be putting out a blog soon. We have, the first thing we're publishing is a really in-depth block binding tutorial because we couldn't find one that we liked. So some of what I'm doing, at least, is trying to open source what my team has learned because it's not out there. And we'll piece together how to do it from a few different sources. Block bindings API is definitely the one that we were like, we have to rewrite this. No one should have to do it this way ever again. But I'll keep that in mind for what, we've got a giant list of things we want to write, and we're slow. But someday, follow me on Blue Sky. I'll share when it actually happens. All right. I think one last anything? Because I know we've got closing remarks in about 10 minutes. Cool. Well, I want to thank you all. It was great to be here. A special thanks to Mike for encouraging me to actually speak again. I had spoken a lot before I had most of my children, and before the pandemic, and before many life-changing things for all of us. And so this is the first time I've spoken since 2019, and it feels nice, and I'm really happy to be here, and it's really nice to be at a local WordCamp again and have this environment with everybody. So I just want to thank everybody for being here and for y'all for putting it together. It's very heartening to see that this is still a place that can be. So thank you so much.